My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm 41 years old, and I've been a law enforcement ranger at Zion National Park in Utah for 13 years. Zion is spectacular. Towering red sandstone cliffs, narrow slot canyons, the Virgin River cutting through rock that's been forming for 200 million years. It's also dangerous. People die here regularly from falls, flash floods, heat exhaustion. My job is to prevent those deaths when possible and recover the bodies when it's not. I thought I'd seen every way the canyon could kill someone. Then, last April, I found a body that had been dead for 6 hours, but was still walking, still hiking, still following the trail like nothing was wrong. And when I tried to stop it, it looked at me with eyes that had no one behind them and kept walking towards something I couldn't see. It was a Tuesday morning, early season, before the summer crowds arrived. I was patrolling the West Rim Trail, a strenuous hike that gains 3,000 feet in elevation over 14 miles. A hiker had triggered a personal locator beacon around 6 a.m., indicating an emergency. I hiked up quickly, found the beacon still transmitting at mile marker 7, but no hiker. Instead, I found blood. A lot of it splashed across the sandstone, drag marks leading to the cliff edge. I looked over. It was a 400-foot drop onto rocks. No one could survive that fall. I called it in, started standard recovery protocols, photographed the scene. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. A man was walking up the trail toward me, mid-30s, hiking gear, backpack, moving with steady determination, and he was covered in blood. His face was pale, his eyes were glassy, and there was a massive head wound, the kind where you can see bone and brain matter, the kind that's absolutely fatal. "Sir, stop. I'm a ranger. You need medical attention." I moved toward him, reaching for my radio to call for a helicopter evacuation, even though I knew it was pointless. No one survives injuries like that. He didn't stop, didn't acknowledge me, just kept walking up the trail with mechanical precision, his boots leaving bloody prints on the red sandstone. I stepped directly in his path, blocking him. He walked into me, not aggressively, just with the same steady forward motion, and I felt the impact of something solid but wrong. His body temperature was cold, far too cold for the 75-degree morning, and his skin had a texture like rubber left in the freezer. "Sir, can you hear me?" I grabbed his arm. He stopped walking, but didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on something up the trail, something I couldn't see. And when I looked at those eyes more closely, I realized they weren't seeing anything. They were empty, like the person who'd been behind them had left, and only the machinery of the body remained, still executing its last command. "Keep hiking." I checked for a pulse, nothing. No heartbeat, no breathing, no signs of life. But the body was standing, was moving, was somehow continuing, despite being clinically dead. I'd seen delayed death responses, people who suffered fatal injuries, but continued moving on adrenaline for a few seconds. But this man had been dead for hours, based on the blood evidence at the cliff. His body should have been at the bottom of that drop, not walking up the trail. I tried to restrain him, to stop his forward motion, but he was stronger than he should be. Dead muscle shouldn't work, shouldn't have the coordination to walk, shouldn't have the strength to push past me. But he did. He simply walked around me and continued up the trail, leaving me standing there with blood on my hands and no explanation for what I'd just encountered. I followed him, documented everything with my body camera, radioed for backup, describe what I was seeing, even though I knew how insane it sounded. I have a fatally injured hiker, possibly deceased, continuing to ambulate up the West Rim Trail, requesting immediate assistance and medical evaluation. The dispatcher's voice came back confused. "Can you repeat that? Did you say deceased but ambulating?" "Affirmative. Subject has massive head trauma consistent with fatal fall, no vital signs, but is mobile and continuing up trail. I'm following at safe distance." The dead hiker walked for another mile, never stopped, never slowed, just maintained the same steady pace. Other hikers were coming down the trail. I had to warn them off, had to redirect them, because none of them seemed to see anything wrong. They'd step aside to let him pass, exchange normal trail greetings, not notice the blood or the visible head wound or the fact that this man was obviously dead. "Did you see that hiker?" I asked a couple after the dead man had passed them. "What hiker?" they replied, looking confused. "He was invisible to them, or I was seeing something they couldn't see, or reality was broken in some fundamental way that made both things true simultaneously." At mile marker 9, the dead hiker stopped, just stood there in the middle of the trail, swaying slightly like he'd finally reached his destination. I approached carefully, tried again to communicate with whatever was driving this body. "Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what happened?" His mouth opened. No words came out, but I heard something, a sound like wind through a canyon, like rocks falling, like the earth itself breathing, and I understood in a way that bypassed language entirely what had happened. He'd fallen early that morning in the dark. He'd misjudged the trail edge and gone over the cliff. The fall had killed him instantly. Massive head trauma, broken neck, death before he hit the rocks. But something about Zion, something about the ancient sandstone that had been here for millions of years, something about the way consciousness interacts with stone. His intention had been so strong, his desire to complete the hike so powerful, that it had imprinted on the canyon itself. And the canyon, being what it was, had given his body back the ability to complete its last task. The body swayed once more, then collapsed, just dropped like someone had cut the strings holding it upright. I checked for signs of life. Still nothing, still dead, but now the body was behaving appropriately, staying down, growing cold and stiff, beginning the normal processes of decay. Backup arrived an hour later. We recovered the body, confirmed identity. His name was Marcus Chin, age 34, from Seattle. His car was at the trailhead. His campsite showed he'd started hiking at 4 a.m., trying to beat the heat and catch sunrise from the rim. The blood at mile 7 matched his blood type. The injuries matched a fall from that cliff. Everything was consistent, except for the fact that he'd walked 2 miles after dying. I wrote my report carefully, describing the facts without interpretation. Subject found at mile 9, deceased from injuries consistent with fall at mile 7. Estimated time of death, 6 hours prior to discovery. I didn't mention the walking, the conversation with other hikers, the sense that the canyon itself had been operating his body. Those details stayed in my personal journal, along with a growing list of things I'd seen at Zion that didn't fit into official reports. Because Marcus wasn't the first. Over the years, I'd seen other things. Hikers who died on the trail but didn't know it yet, continuing their hikes for hours before finally accepting death. Voices calling from empty canyons, always saying, just a little further, almost there. Footprints that appeared overnight, going both directions on the same trail, as if someone had walked forward and backward simultaneously, and always the sense that the canyon was aware, that the sandstone remembered everyone who'd ever walked on it, that 200 million years of existence had given this place something approximating consciousness. I'm still at Zion, still patrolling, still responding to emergencies, still finding bodies in various states of should be dead but aren't. I've learned to recognize when someone is being animated by their own dying intention rather than by life. They move differently, mechanically, following the last command their brain issued before shutting down. And they're always trying to complete something, finish the hike, reach the summit, get back to their family, accomplish the one thing they came here to do. Zion lets them. For a few hours, for a few miles, the canyon gives them the ability to finish what they started. Then it takes them back, lets them rest, integrates them into its ancient memory. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on the trails, I wonder if any of us ever really leave Zion, or if part of every hiker who's ever walked here is still walking, still hiking, still moving through sandstone corridors on trails that exist in layers of time the living can't normally perceive. The canyon remembers, and sometimes the canyon lets the dead finish their journeys. I'm just here to witness it, to document what I can, and to understand that death in Zion doesn't always mean stopping. Sometimes it just means continuing in a different way, powered by intention and stone and something that predates human understanding of how bodies and consciousness work. Marcus Chin finished his hike. He saw the sunrise from the rim, even though he was already dead. The canyon gave him that gift, and who am I to question it, or to pretend I understand the rules that govern a place that's been here since before humans existed and will be here long after we're gone? Story 2. My name is Thomas Reeves. I'm 56 years old, and I've been a wilderness ranger at North Cascades National Park in Washington for 28 years. North Cascades is remote, rugged, and sees fewer visitors than almost any other park in the lower 48. Maybe 30,000 people a year in a park that covers over 500,000 acres. It's a place where you can hike for days without seeing another person, where grizzlies and wolves still roam freely, where the mountains are so steep and so thickly forested that huge areas have never been fully explored. I've loved the isolation, the wildness, the sense that this is what America looked like before we paved everything. But 8 months ago, I found a trail that doesn't appear on any map, and the people hiking it weren't from any time period I recognized, and I'm starting to think that some paths in North Cascades lead to places that exist beside our world rather than in it. It started last September during a routine patrol of the Copper Ridge area. I was about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead, following a well-maintained trail I'd hiked dozens of times, when I noticed something odd. There was a fork in the trail I didn't remember, not a social trail made by hikers going off-route, but a fully developed path with proper trail construction, switchbacks, even a wooden sign pointing down it that read, Sunset Camp 4 miles. There is no Sunset Camp in North Cascades, not on any map, not in any park database, not in any historical records. I checked my GPS. The fork didn't show on my satellite map, but it was there, physically present, looking as official as any Park Service trail. professional curiosity got the better of me. I radioed my location and that I was investigating an unmapped trail, then started down it. The path was well maintained, recently cleared of deadfall, with fresh cut marks on brush. Someone was maintaining this trail, even though it officially didn't exist. After about a mile, I saw hikers, a group of 4, loaded with vintage backpacking gear, external frame packs, canvas clothes, leather boots. They looked like they'd stepped out of a 1970s camping catalog. As I got closer, I could see more details. Their gear wasn't vintage style, it was actually old, worn, patched, showing decades of use. And their faces had a quality I couldn't quite identify. Something slightly wrong about their proportions or coloring or the way they moved. "Afternoon," I called out as I approached. "I'm Ranger Reeves. This is an unmapped trail. Can I ask where you're headed?" They stopped, turned to look at me, and I saw their expressions. Confusion, surprise, maybe fear. One of them, a man in his 40s, with a thick beard and weathered face, spoke carefully. "We're heading to Sunset Camp, same as always. Been doing this trip every September for as long as I can remember." "There's no Sunset Camp in North Cascades," I said gently, "and this trail isn't on any park maps. I need to see your backcountry permit." They exchanged glances. The bearded man dug into his pack and pulled out a crumpled permit, handed it to me. It was genuine Park Service issue, properly filled out, dated September 15th, 1979. 44 years old. "This permit is from 1979, I said slowly. "Today is September 15th, 2023. They looked at each other with expressions that suggested this news wasn't entirely surprising, just unwelcome confirmation of something they'd suspected. "That's not possible," one of the women said, but her voice carried no conviction. "We just started this trip yesterday. Left from Colonial Creek Campground. Same as always." "What year did you think it was?" Long pause. 1979, the bearded man admitted, "but things have been strange. The trail looks different. The forest is thicker. And we keep seeing things that don't match our memories. Buildings that shouldn't be there, roads that don't exist, people with equipment we don't recognize." I pulled out my satellite phone, showed them the date display, the GPS coordinates, the satellite image of the area. Their trail didn't appear on the satellite image. Where they were standing showed as dense forest, no trail, no clearing, no sign of human passage. "I think," I said carefully, "that you've been hiking for longer than you realize, and not in the normal direction." They absorbed this. The bearded man sat down heavily on a log. "We're lost in time, or trapped in time, or—" He trailed off, unable to articulate what was happening. I sat with them for 2 hours, documenting everything, trying to understand. Their story was consistent. They'd started a backpacking trip in September 1979, planning a 4-day loop through what was then newly designated wilderness. They'd hiked to Sunset Camp on day 1, set up their tents, gone to sleep. When they woke up, something was different. The light was wrong, the sounds were wrong, the forest felt wrong, but they'd continued hiking because what else could they do? And they'd been hiking ever since, following the trail to Sunset Camp, arriving, sleeping, waking up to find that no time had passed, then hiking the same road again. "How many times?" I asked. "I don't know," the woman said. "Hundreds? Thousands? It's always September 15th, 1979. We always wake up and start hiking. We always arrive at Sunset Camp. We always go to sleep, and the next day it starts again. But today is different, the bearded man added. Today you're here. Today we're having this conversation. That hasn't happened before. I asked them to come with me, to hike back to the main trail, to let me take them to the ranger station for help. They refused. Not defiant refusal, but sad, resigned refusal. "We tried that before," one of the other men said. "Tried to leave the loop, tried to go somewhere else. But we always end up back on the trail to Sunset Camp, like the trail is the only place we can exist now." I left them there, hiked back to the fork, then back to the main trail. When I reached the junction, I looked back. The fork was gone. Just solid forest. No trail, no sign that anything had ever been there. I checked my GPS track. It showed me hiking in a straight line along the main trail, no deviation, no fork, no investigation of an unmapped path. But I had their 1979 permit in my pocket, physical evidence that I hadn't imagined the encounter. I did research, found news articles from October 1979 about 4 hikers who'd gone missing in North Cascades. The names matched the names on the permit. Their vehicle had been found at Colonial Creek Campground. Search teams had looked for 3 weeks, found no trace. The missing hikers were declared lost and presumed dead after a year. But they weren't dead. They were trapped in a loop, hiking the same trail, living the same day, unable to break free from September 15th, 1979. And occasionally, when conditions were right, their trail intersected with real trails in real time, and they could be seen by people from the present before slipping back into their loop. I've gone back looking for that fork a dozen times. Sometimes I find it, sometimes I don't. When I do find it, I hike down, and sometimes the 4 hikers are there, and sometimes the trail is empty. I've tried to help them, tried to bring them food or updated maps or information about the modern world. They're always grateful, but always resigned. They know they're trapped, and they've accepted it, or at least stopped fighting it. The last time I saw them, the bearded man gave me a message. "If you keep looking for us, you might get caught too. The trail wants more hikers. It's hungry for more loops. Stop coming here." But I can't stop, because they're my responsibility, in a sense. They're hikers lost in my park, even if they've been lost for 44 years, even if they're stuck in a time that no longer exists. They deserve to have someone remember they're there, someone who checks on them, someone who acknowledges that they didn't just vanish. They got caught in something the North Cascades created, some loop or trap or boundary condition where time doesn't work right. I'm retiring next year. I've already trained my replacement, a young ranger named Sarah who's eager and competent and smart. But I haven't told her about the fork in the trail, about the hikers from 1979, about the loops that exist in the mountains. Maybe I should. Maybe she deserves to know what she's getting into, or maybe it's kinder to let her discover it herself, if she's supposed to discover it, if the trail decides to show itself to her. The North Cascades are deeper than maps show. Some trails lead forward in space, some lead backward in time, and some lead in directions that don't have names in our geometry. I've walked them for 28 years, and I still don't understand them. But I know they're there, and I know people get lost on them, and I know that being a ranger sometimes means patrolling trails that exist in more than 3 dimensions, checking on hikers, who've been lost longer than I've been alive. September 15th is coming again soon. I'll go to Copper Ridge, look for the fork, see if the trail shows itself. See if the 4 hikers are still there, still trapped, still hiking toward a camp they'll never truly reach, because reaching it means starting over. And I'll acknowledge them, document them, remind them that someone knows they're there. It's the least a ranger can do for hikers who got lost in territory that doesn't follow the normal rules, even if those hikers have been lost for 44 years and counting. Story 3. My name is Rebecca Stone. I'm 39 years old, and I'm a search and rescue coordinator at Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. I've been doing mountain rescue for 15 years, extracting injured climbers from cliff faces, finding lost hikers in blizzards, recovering bodies from avalanches. I've seen death in every form the mountains can deliver, and I thought I'd developed immunity to the emotional impact, the professional distance necessary to do this job. Then last winter, I found a rescue shelter that contained 7 people who'd been rescued from the mountains over the last 60 years, but had never left, who existed in a suspended state between being lost and being found, and who begged me to let them stay lost, because being rescued meant something worse than dying in the cold. It was February, the dead of winter, during a particularly brutal cold snap. A solo climber had activated his emergency beacon from somewhere high on Long's Peak, indicating he was in trouble but couldn't provide details before his device died. We launched a rescue attempt despite the conditions. Winds gusting to 80 miles per hour, temperature 30 below, visibility near zero. I led a team of 4 experienced rescuers, all of us with decades of combined mountain experience. We found the climber's last known coordinates, but he wasn't there, just his beacon, frozen in the snow, still transmitting. We searched the area, fighting the wind and cold, knowing that exposure time was critical. That's when we found the shelter. It was built into the rock face, camouflaged by snow and stone, completely unmarked. The entrance was a small opening, barely visible, that led to a larger space inside. We could see light inside, which made no sense. There was no reason for anyone to have lights up here, no explanation for who would maintain a shelter in such a remote location. "Hello," I called into the entrance. "This is Rocky Mountain, sir. Anyone inside need assistance?" A voice called back. "Please don't come in. Please just leave. We're safe here. We don't need rescue." But that's not how rescue works. If there are people in a shelter at 13,000 feet in deadly conditions, we extract them whether they want it or not. I crawled through the entrance, my team following. The interior was impossible. The shelter was large, maybe 20 by 30 feet, carved from solid rock with smooth walls that showed tool marks, but no indication of when or how it had been created. There were bunks, a stove, supplies, oil lamps providing light, and there were 7 people. They looked wrong. Not injured or frostbitten or hypothermic, but wrong in a fundamental way. Their clothing was from different eras. One man in 1960s mountaineering gear, a woman in 1980s, winter clothes, others in more modern equipment. They all looked healthy, but faded somehow, like photographs left in the sun, their colors muted and their edges slightly blurred. "You need to leave," the man in 1960s gear said firmly. "You can't rescue us. If you try, something worse happens." "Sir, I'm Rebecca Stone, SR coordinator. What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, David Palmer. I was climbing Long's Peak in December 1967, got caught in a storm. I was dying of exposure when I found this shelter, and I've been here ever since. I looked at the others. They nodded. I'm Janet Kowalski, 1983, the woman said. Robert Chin, 1995. Thomas Hayes, 2001. Sarah Winters, 2008. Michael Brooks, 2015. And Amanda Foster, 2019. 7 people spanning 6 decades, all claiming to have found this shelter while dying of exposure, all claiming to have been here ever since. It was insane, impossible, but they were obviously real and obviously present. You've been in this shelter for years, I asked carefully, without aging, without leaving, without anyone finding you? The shelter preserves us, David Palmer explained. When we were dying, when we'd accepted death, the shelter appeared. It offered us survival at a cost. We could live here, safe and warm, but we could never leave. If we try to leave, if anyone tries to take us out, we die immediately. Not hypothermia death, not gradual shutdown, just instant cessation. The shelter only works if we stay. One of my team members, a guy named Jake, was already on his radio trying to call this in. No signal. We were too high, too remote. He moved toward the entrance to get closer to line of sight with the valley. The 7 sheltered people watched him with expressions of resignation. Your beacon, I said to David Palmer. The solo climber who activated his beacon, where is he? They looked at each other. He found the shelter 3 days ago, Sarah Winters said quietly. He was dying, same as all of us. The shelter appeared to him. He came inside, and now he's one of us. His name is Marcus Webb. He's sleeping in the back. I looked toward the rear of the shelter. There was indeed someone sleeping on one of the bunks. A man in modern climbing gear, looking peaceful and healthy, despite having supposedly been near death 3 days ago. This isn't possible, I said. People don't just live in magical shelters for decades without aging or supplies or contact with the outside world. And yet, here we are, David Palmer said. You can try to take us out. You can try to rescue us. But I'm telling you what happens. The moment we pass through that entrance with the intention of leaving permanently, we die. The shelter releases us, and we experience all of the death we've been postponing. 60 years of aging in an instant. Hypothermia, frostbite, starvation, all the things that should have killed us but didn't because the shelter held them back. Others have tried to rescue us before, Janet Kowalski added. Rescue teams find the shelter occasionally, try to extract us. We've learned to warn them, to beg them not to try. But some don't listen. She gestured to a corner where there were names carved into the rock. Those are the rescuers who tried to force us out. They died too, the moment they crossed the threshold carrying one of us. The shelter doesn't just protect us. It enforces our presence here. I looked at the names, 8 of them, carved with dates ranging from 1971 to 2017, all dates when rescue operations might have been conducted, all implying that rescuers had died trying to extract the sheltered people. My team was listening to this, their expressions ranging from disbelief to horror. We can't just leave people here, Jake said. That's not how this works. Then try to take us, David Palmer said simply. Choose one of us. Carry us out. See what happens. But I'm warning you, both of you will die. The person you're trying to rescue and the person doing the rescuing. I faced an impossible decision. 7 people claiming to be trapped in a protective shelter, claiming that rescue meant death. A solo climber who'd been absorbed into their group, apparently healthy and safe despite having been dying 3 days ago, and no way to verify any of this without potentially killing someone. I need to think, I said. My team and I are going back outside. We'll return with more resources, more people, figure out the right approach. We'll still be here, Sarah Winters said sadly. We're always here. The shelter doesn't let us leave, but it doesn't make anyone stay who doesn't need it. You can come and go freely. It's only those of us who were dying, who were offered the shelter's protection. We're bound here. We left, crawled back through the entrance, back into the brutal cold and wind, hiked down to where we could get radio contact, called into the base station, described what we'd found, a shelter with multiple people claiming to have been there for decades. The base commander's response was immediate and disturbing. You found the preservation shelter. We have records of it going back to the 1970s. Every few years, someone finds it during a rescue operation. There are complications associated with it. Return to base, and we'll brief you on the situation. Back at the ranger station, they showed me the files. The preservation shelter had been documented since at least 1967, when David Palmer had gone missing. Over the decades, multiple rescue teams had found it, had encountered the preserved people inside, and had learned through tragic experience that extracting them was impossible. The shelter enforced some kind of bargain. Survive here forever or die immediately upon leaving. We can't officially acknowledge it, the base commander explained. Can't put it on maps, can't warn people about it, because if we do, we'd have to explain how and why it exists, and we don't have those answers. We just know it's real, it's permanent, and it occasionally claims people who are dying of exposure on Long's Peak. What about Marcus Webb, the solo climber who activated his beacon? We'll declare him lost, presume dead, same as we do with everyone the shelter takes. We'll search for a few more days, find nothing, close the case, and Marcus will live in that shelter for the next 60 years, or until he dies naturally, whichever comes first. That's insane. We can't just abandon people because some magic shelter won't let them leave. Then propose an alternative. We've been dealing with the preservation shelter for 50 years. If you have a solution, I'm eager to hear it. I didn't have a solution, still don't. I've gone back to the shelter twice since that initial discovery, brought supplies to the people living there, documented their conditions, confirmed that yes, they're real and healthy and trapped. David Palmer has been there for 58 years and looks maybe 50. Janet Kowalski has been there for 41 years and looks 45. They age, but slowly, and they're protected from the elements and starvation and everything else that should kill them in that environment. And Marcus Webb, the solo climber I was supposed to rescue, he's accepted his situation, says the shelter is peaceful, that the other residents are good company, that living forever in a magic cave is better than being dead. Maybe he's right. Maybe it is a form of rescue, just not the kind I'm trained to provide. I'm still a SAR coordinator, still lead rescue operations on Long's Peak, but now I know there's one outcome worse than failing to save someone, succeeding in a way that traps them in an eternal half-existence, neither fully alive nor fully dead, preserved but not living. The preservation shelter is still up there, still waiting for the next dying climber to stumble across it, still offering its bargain, survive forever or die today. And As long as I'm doing SAR work, I'll keep encountering people who've accepted that bargain, who've chosen infinite imprisonment over immediate death. I don't know if they made the right choice, but I know I can't rescue them from it. Some fates are worse than dying in the mountains, and some survivals are more terrible than death. The preservation shelter taught me that. And every time I lead a rescue operation now, I wonder if the person I'm saving might be better off dying quickly in the cold rather than living forever in a shelter that won't let them go. Story 4. My name is Carlos Mendez. I'm 27 years old, and I'm finishing my second season as a wildlife biologist assigned to Yellowstone National Park. I came here to study wolf behavior, to document pack dynamics and predator-prey relationships in one of the most successful rewilding projects in North American history. I expected to spend my time observing Canis lupus, the gray wolf, and understanding how apex predators shape ecosystems. What I didn't expect was to discover that some of Yellowstone's wolves aren't wolves at all, and that some predators in the park are far more apex than anything in our taxonomy, and that the most dangerous thing in Yellowstone isn't bears or bison or geothermal features. It's the things that have learned to look like wolves while being something entirely other. It started in July during a routine tracking operation. I was following the Molly's Pack, one of Yellowstone's established wolf packs, using radio telemetry to locate their positions. The alpha female's signal was strong, indicating she was nearby. But when I finally spotted her through my binoculars, something was off. She was moving wrong, not with the fluid, economic motion of a canid, but with a jerky, almost mechanical gait. And her proportions were slightly incorrect. Legs too long, body too narrow, head slightly too large for the frame. I adjusted my binoculars, trying to get a clearer view. The wolf stopped, turned, looked directly at me despite being over 300 yards away and downwind. And it smiled. Not a canine expression. Wolves don't smile. But a human smile, lips pulling back to show teeth arranged in an expression of amusement or mockery. Then it turned and loped away, and its movement normalized. Just a normal wolf moving normally, and I was left wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Heat exhaustion maybe, or a trick of the light through the binoculars. But 3 days later, I found a kill that made me reconsider. The Molly's Pack had brought down an elk. Standard predation, nothing unusual, except when I examined the carcass, the kill wounds were wrong. Wolves kill by targeting the throat or hamstrings, by bringing down prey through specific, evolved hunting strategies. This elk had been killed by something that understood wolves should target certain areas, but didn't quite know why. The wounds were in approximately correct locations, but made with the wrong angles, the wrong depth, as if something had been mimicking wolf behavior without fully understanding the mechanics. And around the kill site, mixed with normal wolf tracks, were other prints. Similar to wolf tracks, but with 6 toes instead of 5, arranged in a pattern that suggested something was either wearing wolf feet like shoes or could shape its own extremities to approximate wolf anatomy while not quite matching it. I photographed everything, collected samples, documented the anomalies. That evening, I reviewed my field cameras, motion-activated cameras I'd set up to record wolf behavior when I wasn't present. The footage showed the Molly's Pack feeding on the elk, normal behavior, standard pack dynamics. But in several frames, one wolf would glitch. That's the only word for it. Its form would blur for a fraction of a second, and in that blur, I could see something else, something taller, something bipedal, something that wore the wolf form like a coat it was still learning to wear properly. I showed the footage to my supervisor, a wildlife biologist who'd worked at Yellowstone for 20 years. She watched it silently, her expression growing more troubled with each frame. When it ended, she closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. "You've seen them," she said. It wasn't a question. "Seen what?" "The others. That's what we call them internally when we talk about them at all, which is rarely and always unofficially. They're not wolves. They're not animals. There's something else that's learned to look like wolves well enough to fool casual observation." "What are they?" "We don't know. They've been here since before Yellowstone was established, probably far longer. The native peoples had stories about them. Trickster spirits that took animal forms, shapeshifters that hunted alongside natural predators while being something fundamentally different. When we reintroduced wolves in 1995, the others saw an opportunity. They integrated with the wolf packs, learned to mimic them, and now they exist alongside the real wolves, virtually indistinguishable, except to people who know what to look for. How many? Unknown. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. They don't breed. At least, not that we've observed. But they don't die either. The same individuals have been documented for 30 years without aging. They just continue existing, hunting alongside real wolves, occasionally slipping in their mimicry enough that someone notices. She pulled out a file folder, thick with papers and photographs spanning decades. These are all documented sightings, reports from biologists, rangers, researchers, all noting the same things. Wolves with wrong proportions, incorrect behavior, that glitching effect you captured on camera. We don't put it in official reports because how do you document something that shouldn't exist? How do you write a scientific paper about shapeshifters? I looked through the reports, dozens of them, going back to the 1970s, even before wolf reintroduction. Photos showing the same anomalies I'd captured, wolves that looked almost right, but not quite. Frames where the wolf form seemed to slip and reveal something else underneath. "What should I do?" I asked. "Your job. Document wolves. Track their movements. Study pack dynamics. Just understand that sometimes what you're observing isn't Canis lupus. It's something older, something that's learned to mimic them well enough that most people never notice. And whatever you do, don't try to get close to the others. Real wolves will avoid humans, will maintain distance. The others are curious about us, interested in us, and their interest is not something you want focused on you." I should have heeded that warning, should have maintained professional distance, treated the others as observable phenomena like any other wildlife. But I'm a scientist, and scientific curiosity is a powerful motivator. I started tracking the others specifically, learning to identify them, documenting their behaviors and the ways they differed from real wolves. The others hunted more efficiently than real wolves, made kills that were too clean, too precise. They never missed their targets, never had unsuccessful hunts. Real wolves fail 90% of the time when hunting large prey. The others never failed. They also communicated differently. Wolf vocalizations follow specific patterns, howls, barks, whines, all with distinct meanings. The others produced sounds that approximated these but were slightly off frequency, as if they were playing recordings of wolf sounds rather than making them naturally. And they watched me. Whenever I was in the field, I'd catch them observing me from distances where normal wolves wouldn't maintain visual contact. They'd track my movements, follow my vehicle, appear in places where they shouldn't be based on their last known locations. They were studying me as intently as I was studying them. In September, one of them approached me directly. I was sitting in my vehicle at a pullout, documenting elk movements in Lamar Valley. A wolf appeared at my window, close, maybe 10 feet away, maintaining eye contact in a way that no wild wolf would. It was one of the others. I knew immediately. The proportions were wrong. The eyes were too intelligent, and when it opened its mouth, no sound came out, but I heard words anyway. "Why do you watch us?" The communication wasn't verbal. It was direct, mind to mind, bypassing language entirely. I understood its question not through words, but through meaning, transmitted directly into my consciousness. "I'm studying wolves," I said aloud, unsure if it could understand spoken language. "We are not wolves. You know this. Why do you pretend otherwise?" "What are you then?" It tilted its head, too far, further than wolf anatomy should allow. "We are what we need to be. Currently, we are wolves because wolves serve our purpose. Before, we were other things. Buffalo when buffalo were numerous, elk before that. Further back, things you don't have names for. We adapt. We mimic. We exist alongside what you call nature while being separate from it. What's your purpose? The same as any apex predator. We maintain balance. We prevent overpopulation. We select which genes continue and which end. We have been doing this for longer than your species has existed. Yellowstone is old, but we are older. Are you dangerous to humans?" The wolf that wasn't a wolf made a sound like laughter. "Only to those who threaten the balance. We have no interest in humans as prey. You are not part of the systems we maintain, but you study us, document us, try to understand us. This could be problematic. Because I might reveal what you are. Because understanding leads to interference. Your scientists love to interfere, to manage, to control. If they understood we exist, they would try to capture us, study us, perhaps eliminate us as competition for their precious wolves. We prefer to remain unnoticed, to continue our work without interference." "I won't tell anyone," I said, though I'd already told my supervisor. "Your supervisor knows. The senior staff know. This is acceptable. They understand the necessity of our presence and maintain appropriate silence. But if you publish, if you try to make our existence public knowledge, we will respond, not with violence. Violence is crude and unnecessary, but we will ensure your credibility is destroyed, your data is corrupted, your career ends before it truly begins." The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, like it was explaining natural consequences rather than making a deliberate threat. Then it turned and loped away, its form blurring mid-stride, and for just a moment I saw what it actually was. Something tall and angular, something that looked vaguely humanoid but constructed according to different anatomical rules, something that wore animal shapes the way humans wear clothes. I continued my research for the rest of the season, but I focused on real wolves exclusively. Documented the Molly's Pack, the Wapiti Pack, the Junction Pack, all the established wolf groups in Yellowstone. When I encountered the others, I photographed them like any other wolf, made notes that identified them only through their telemetry collar numbers, never mentioned the anomalies in my official reports. But in my personal journal, I documented everything. The glitching forms, the impossible behaviors, the direct communication. I wrote it all down, not for publication, but for the record, because someone should know they're there, even if that knowledge has to remain unofficial. My contract ends next month. I'll be moving to a different park, continuing my wolf research elsewhere. Part of me is relieved to be leaving Yellowstone, to be getting away from the others and their unsettling presence. But part of me understands that they're not unique to Yellowstone. If they've been adapting and mimicking for longer than humans have existed, they're probably everywhere. Probably in every ecosystem, wearing whatever form best suits their purposes. That wolf you saw in Denali, that bear in Glacier, that mountain lion in Big Bend, maybe it was real wildlife, or maybe it was something older, something that's learned to look like real wildlife while being fundamentally other. And maybe, like me, you noticed something slightly wrong, proportions off, behavior strange, that moment where the form glitched and you saw something else underneath. If you did, don't investigate too deeply. Don't try to document it officially. Don't threaten their ability to remain hidden, because they've been maintaining nature's balance for millions of years, and they're very, very good at protecting their anonymity. The others are real. They live in our parks alongside real wildlife. They hunt, they feed, they maintain ecosystems in ways we don't fully understand. And they're watching us with the same scientific interest we direct at them. I just hope they don't decide we're a problem that needs to be managed. Because if apex predators older than humanity decide we're upsetting the balance, I don't think there's anything we could do to stop them. Story 5. My name is Hannah Lee. I'm 53 years old, and I've been a cave specialist ranger at Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota for 19 years. Wind Cave is the 7th longest cave in the world, with over 150 miles of mapped passages, and it's famous for its boxwork formations, intricate calcite structures that exist in such abundance here that 95% of the world's boxwork is found in Wind Cave. It's beautiful, it's geologically significant, and it's been my professional home for nearly 2 decades. But last March, I found a passage that isn't on any map, and the formations in it aren't boxwork or any other type of speleothem known to geology, and I think I discovered that some caves have immune systems that attack foreign objects, including humans who venture where they shouldn't. It happened during a solo survey of an area called the Far East section, one of the deeper, less visited parts of the cave. I was documenting new boxwork formations for our geological database, standard work I'd done hundreds of times. The passage I was in dead-ended, or so the maps indicated, but as I was preparing to turn back, I noticed a draft, a steady flow of air coming from what should have been solid rock. Cave drafts indicate additional passages. Air has to be moving between spaces, which means there's more cave to be discovered. I examined the wall more carefully and found a small opening, maybe 2 feet wide, partially hidden behind a collapse of flowstone. I could feel strong airflow coming through it, which suggested a significant chamber beyond. Professional protocol required me to mark the location and return with a survey team. But I had my equipment, I had experience, and I was curious. So I squeezed through the opening into an area that would change my understanding of what caves are and what they do. The passage beyond was different from anything I'd seen in Wind Cave. The walls weren't the typical gray limestone, but something that looked almost organic, striated and textured like muscle tissue, with a faint iridescence when my headlamp hit it. The formations weren't boxwork, but something else entirely, structures that looked like they'd been grown rather than deposited by dripping water over millennia. I moved deeper into the passage, documenting everything with my camera. The formations became more complex, more elaborate, crystalline structures that branched and divided like neural networks, surfaces that seemed to pulse very slightly when I focused my light on them, textures that looked almost cellular under magnification. Then I noticed the first node. It was attached to the ceiling, about the size of a baseball, composed of the same organic-looking material as the walls. It had a quality that reminded me of a barnacle or polyp, something living or once living, something that belonged in an ocean rather than a cave. I reached up to photograph it closely. The moment my hand came within a few inches of the node, it opened. Not mechanically, but organically, like a flower blooming or an eye opening. Inside was a bright blue bioluminescent core, pulsing with soft light. And from that core came a sound, a frequency I felt more than heard, a vibration that resonated in my bones and teeth. More nodes opened throughout the passage, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all revealing their bioluminescent cores, all producing that same frequency. The passage lit up with blue light, and I realized I wasn't in a dead-end section of Wind Cave anymore. I was in something else, something that had been hidden beneath the mapped cave, something that was reacting to my presence. The walls began to move, not collapsing or shifting, moving deliberately like muscles contracting. The organic texture became more pronounced, and I could see now that the entire passage was lined with something that resembled tissue more than rock. The formations weren't geological at all. They were biological, or something that blurred the line between geology and biology. I backed away slowly, not wanting to trigger any aggressive response. But the passage behind me had changed. The opening I'd come through was closing, the flowstone growing across it like scar tissue forming over a wound. I was being sealed in. The vibration from the nodes intensified, and I felt it affecting my body. My heart rate increased. My breathing became labored. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the frequency was interfering with my nervous system. And I understood in a moment of clarity that cut through the mounting panic. This was an immune response. The cave system, or something that lived within the cave system, had detected my presence as a foreign object and was responding to eliminate the intrusion. I tried the opening behind me, but the flowstone was already too thick to break through. I was trapped in a passage that was actively trying to expel or destroy me, with no clear exit and no way to call for help. Radio doesn't work in caves, and I was too deep for any signal to reach the surface. The nodes continued their vibration, and I felt my body responding in disturbing ways. My skin was becoming hypersensitive, reacting to the air currents like I had severe sunburn. My vision was blurring at the edges, seeing colors that didn't exist in normal spectrums. And I could taste copper, that metallic taste that indicates something is seriously wrong with your body chemistry. I had maybe an hour before the immune response would kill me, either through physiological disruption or through something more direct. I needed to find another way out, and I needed to do it fast. I moved deeper into the passage, away from the closed opening, hoping to find an exit, or at least an area where the immune response was less intense. The passage widened into a chamber, And what I found there made me understand that Wind Cave was far stranger than anyone had realized. The chamber was spherical, maybe 40 feet in diameter, and every surface was covered with those node formations. Thousands of them, all open, all pulsing with bioluminescent light, all producing their frequency in perfect harmony. And in the center of the chamber, suspended somehow in midair with no visible support, was a structure that looked like a heart, a massive crystalline organ that pulsed in time with the nodes that seemed to be coordinating their response. That was clearly the central processing unit for whatever this system was. I was looking at the heart of something, not Wind Cave itself, but something that lived within Wind Cave, or that Wind Cave had grown around, or that existed in symbiosis with the cave system. An organism or system or intelligence that maintained itself through geological processes, that perceived intrusions and responded to them, that had been here for longer than the cave had been known to humans, and probably longer than humans had existed. The heart structure pulsed more rapidly when I entered the chamber, and the immune response intensified. I could feel my cells beginning to break down, could sense my body chemistry shifting toward dissolution. The cave system was trying to absorb me, to break me down into component parts that could be integrated or expelled. I did the only thing I could think of. I spoke to it, out loud, directing my words at the heart structure. I'm not a threat. I'm not here to harm you. I'm a cave specialist. I protect caves. I'm on your side. The pulsing slowed slightly. Maybe coincidence, maybe I was anthropomorphizing a non-intelligent process. But I continued talking, explaining what I did, how I devoted my career to cave conservation, how I understood caves were living systems that needed protection from human impact. And gradually the immune response decreased. The vibration from the nodes became less intense. The sensation of cellular breakdown faded. The hypersensitivity of my skin normalized. The cave system was listening, or at least responding to my presence differently, treating me less like a foreign invader and more like a potential symbiote. I stayed in that chamber for what felt like hours, talking to the heart structure, explaining my relationship with caves, my commitment to protecting them, and slowly an opening appeared in the chamber wall, not the way I'd come in, but a new passage, freshly formed, leading upward. I followed it. The passage twisted and climbed, clearly created specifically to guide me out, and eventually it connected with a mapped section of Wind Cave that I recognized. The passage behind me sealed itself as I progressed, leaving no trace of the route I had taken. I emerged into the tourist area where visitors were taking guided tours, completely unaware that beneath their feet was something that was alive in ways geology doesn't account for. I said nothing to them, just made my way back to the ranger station, where I sat for several hours trying to process what had happened. I filed a minimal report, discovered a passage in the Far East section, documented new formations. Passage subsequently collapsed and is no longer accessible. I didn't mention the organic textures, the bioluminescent nodes, the heart structure, the immune response. How could I? What vocabulary exists for describing a cave that's also an organism that can perceive and respond and actively defend itself against intrusions? But I've gone back multiple times since then, searching for that passage, looking for evidence that what I experienced was real. The opening is gone, sealed completely, with no indication it ever existed. But I know it's still there, just behind the rock face, waiting and watching. And I know that Wind Cave is more than a geological formation. It's a host to something ancient and aware, something that maintains itself through processes we've mistaken for normal cave development. I'm more careful now about where I explore in Wind Cave. I pay attention to air currents, to formations that look slightly too organic, to passages that seem to breathe. And I've started noticing similar signs in other caves, reports from other cave specialists describing formations that don't quite match known speleothem types, areas where cavers feel unwelcome or actively repelled, passages that seem to reconfigure themselves between surveys. We think caves are static, unchanging, except on geological timescales. But what if some caves are alive? What if they grow and adapt and respond to intrusions? What if the slow drip of water and deposition of minerals is just one function of a much larger system that includes awareness and defense mechanisms? I don't have answers, but I have experiences that suggest our understanding of caves is incomplete, that some cave systems are host to things we haven't recognized as life because they operate on time scales and through mechanisms so different from biological life that we fail to see them. The Wind Cave is alive, or it hosts something alive. And that something tolerated my intrusion once, allowed me to leave with a warning. But I don't think I'd be allowed back to that deep chamber again. I made my peace with the heart structure, established that I wasn't a threat, and was permitted to leave. But that permission was probably one time only. Some caves should remain unexplored. Some passages should stay sealed. And some immune systems should be respected, even when they belong to things we didn't know could have immune systems at all. Story 6. My name is Stephen Park. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a backcountry ranger at Isle Royale National Park in Michigan. Isle Royale is unique. It's an island park in Lake Superior, accessible only by seaplane or boat, with no roads and minimal development. It's famous for its wolf-moose predator-prey study, the longest-running study of its kind, and for its isolation and pristine wilderness. I've worked here for 6 years, comfortable with the extreme remoteness, the harsh winters, the sense of being truly cut off from civilization. But this past winter, I discovered that Isle Royale is also home to something that lives beneath the frozen lake. Something that creates perfect ice circles in the middle of winter storms. And something that took 3 hikers and replaced them with versions that are almost but not quite the same people who went missing. It started in January during the coldest part of winter, when the park is essentially closed to visitors. Only a skeleton crew of rangers stays year-round, maintaining minimal operations, doing occasional wildlife surveys, making sure the island survives until spring. I was one of 3 rangers wintering over, along with my colleagues Mike Torres and Sarah Chen. On January 14th, we received an unusual visitor notification. A group of 3 researchers had obtained a special permit for winter fieldwork, studying ice formation patterns on Lake Superior. They'd arrived by chartered plane, planned to stay 2 weeks, camp in the backcountry, and conduct their research. We gave them the standard briefing about winter hazards, made sure they had appropriate gear and emergency communication devices, and watched them head out to their research area near Muskie Basin. 4 days later, their emergency beacon activated, all 3 devices simultaneously, which was unusual. Emergency situations typically affect individuals differently, leading to staggered beacon activation. But all three went off at the exact same moment at 3:47 a.m. Mike, Sarah, and I geared up for winter rescue: snowshoes, emergency medical supplies, cold weather gear. The temperature was minus 15 degrees with wind chill pushing it to minus 35. Lake Superior was completely frozen, covered in several feet of ice and snow, and we could walk across it like solid ground. We reached the beacon location around dawn. The three researchers were there, alive, apparently healthy, standing in the middle of a perfect circle of clear ice. The circle was maybe 40 feet in diameter, completely smooth and transparent, like someone had polished it to a mirror finish. Around it, the ice was normal, rough, snow-covered, opaque. But inside the circle, it was perfect. "Are you folks all right?" I called out. "Your emergency beacons were activated." They turned to look at us, and something was immediately wrong. They moved in perfect synchronization, all three turning at exactly the same angle and speed, and their expressions were identical: slight confusion, slight concern, perfectly mirrored across three different faces. "We're fine," they said in unison. Then, as if realizing that was wrong, one of them, the lead researcher, a woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, spoke individually. "I'm fine. We're all fine. We didn't activate the beacons. Maybe a malfunction." We approached the edge of the ice circle. "How did this form?" Sarah asked, gesturing at the perfectly clear ice. "This isn't natural ice formation." "We're not sure," Dr. Wells said. "We woke up this morning and we were standing in the middle of it. We must have sleepwalked here, all three of us." That made no sense. Simultaneous sleepwalking by three adults ending up in the exact center of a geometrically perfect ice circle that hadn't existed the day before. But they seemed healthy, seemed rational, and our instruments showed no signs of hypothermia or other cold weather injuries. "We're going to need you to come back to the ranger station for evaluation," Mike said. "Standard protocol after beacon activation." They agreed readily, too readily. Researchers who'd come specifically for winter field work, who'd obtained rare special permits, would typically resist ending their project early. But these three just gathered their equipment and followed us back without complaint. At the station, we conducted standard medical evaluations. Temperature normal, heart rate normal, blood pressure normal. No signs of frostbite, hypothermia, or any other winter-related injury. But there were oddities. All three had identical small marks on their left hands, circular patterns that looked almost like frostbite but weren't accompanied by tissue damage. And when we asked them specific questions about their research, their answers were vague, non-specific, like they were working from incomplete information about what researchers should say rather than actual research experience. "What exactly were you studying?" I asked Dr. Will. "Ice formation patterns on Lake Superior in winter." Each phrase separated slightly, like she was reading from index cards rather than speaking from knowledge. "Can you describe your methodology?" Long pause. "We were observing, taking measurements, standard scientific procedures." She wasn't wrong exactly, but no real researcher would describe their methodology that way. It was too general, too lacking in specific detail, like someone who knew what research looked like from outside but didn't actually know how to do it. Over the next 3 days, the oddities accumulated. The three researchers stayed at the station. We'd suspended their backcountry permit pending investigation of the beacon activation, and we observed their behavior. They moved in unconscious synchronization, often doing the same things at the same time. They ate identical amounts of food, went to sleep at the same moment, woke simultaneously. And they never seemed cold, even when outside in minus 20-degree weather, wearing inadequate clothing. I think they're not the original researchers, Sarah said during a private meeting with Mike and me. I think something happened to them in that ice circle, and what came back are copies, replacements. Replaced by what? Mike asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely dismissing the idea. By whatever created that perfect ice circle, by whatever lives under the frozen lake. We did background checks, contacted the university where the researchers supposedly worked. The real Dr. Patricia Wells confirmed she'd planned a winter research trip to Isle Royale and had departed for it on January 10th. The two other researchers, Dr. James Kim and Dr. Robert Foster, were confirmed as her colleagues and field partners. Everything checked out on paper. But these weren't the people who'd left that university. These were something else, wearing their faces, living in their bodies, speaking with their voices, but not quite getting all the details right. On the fourth day, I went back to the ice circle alone. I needed to see it again, needed to understand what had happened there. The circle was still present, still perfectly clear and smooth, and as I approached, I saw something beneath the ice, a shape, large and dark, moving slowly under the frozen surface. It wasn't a fish or seal or any normal lake creature. It was too big, too angular, moving with deliberate purpose rather than animal instinct. As I watched, it rose closer to the underside of the ice, and I could see details. A form that was vaguely humanoid but elongated, with too many joints in the limbs, with a head that was smooth and featureless. It pressed against the underside of the ice, and where it touched, the ice became perfectly clear and smooth. It was creating the circle, I realized, polishing the ice from beneath, making a window through which it could observe the surface world. And as I watched, its featureless head oriented toward me. It knew I was there. It was looking at me through 40 feet of ice and snow, studying me with the same intent that I'd been studying the replaced researchers. I backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with the thing beneath the ice. It followed my movement, tracking me, its head tilting in a gesture that looked almost human, but was clearly something else, imitating human body language. I returned to the station and told Mike and Sarah what I'd seen. There's something under the ice, something intelligent. And I think it took the three researchers, the real ones, and sent back these replacements to study us, to learn about humans by imitating them. What do we do? Sarah asked. We can't prove they're not human. We can't detain them without cause. And if we try to explain what's really happening, we'll sound insane. We ultimately let them leave, arranged for a special charter to take them back to the mainland, back to their university, back to lives they would attempt to live despite being imperfect copies of the people who'd originally inhabited those lives. What else could we do? But before they left, Dr. Wells, or the thing wearing her face, came to me privately. You saw it, didn't you? The one beneath the ice. Yes. It's been there for a very long time, since before humans came to this island. It lives in the deep water beneath the ice, and it's curious about surface dwellers. The original Dr. Wells and her colleagues fell into the ice circle. It wasn't solid, despite appearances, and they encountered it in the water below. And it was so interested in them, so curious about what they were that had kept them, made copies, sent the copies back to learn more. Are the originals still alive? In a sense, they're being preserved, studied, kept in the deep water where the creature maintains its collection. They're not suffering. They're in a kind of stasis. And eventually, when the creature has learned enough from the copies, it will return them. And what are you? If you're not Dr. Wells? The thing smiled, too wide, showing too many teeth. I'm her echo, a reflection sent to walk in the world above while she sleeps below. I'll live her life, do her work, interact with her colleagues and family, and everything I learn, everything I experience, will be transmitted back to the one beneath the ice, helping it understand what it means to be human. That's horrifying. Is it? The original Dr. Wells is safe. She'll be returned unchanged once the study is complete. And in the meantime, I'll live a life she would have lived anyway. What's the harm? I couldn't answer that. The thing wearing Dr. Wells's face thanked me for our hospitality, joined her two fellow echoes, and left Isle Royale on the chartered plane. And I was left knowing that somewhere in the world, 3 people are living lives while their originals sleep in cold water beneath frozen Lake Superior, held in the collection of something that's studying humanity through the most direct method possible, becoming us. I'm still at Isle Royale, still working winters, still maintaining the island, but I avoid the ice circles now. They appear regularly during winter, perfect clear spots in the rough ice, always 40 feet in diameter, always with something dark moving beneath them. Windows through which the thing below watches the surface world, selecting its next subjects for study. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm the original Stephen Park or if I've already been copied, if I fell into an ice circle I don't remember, and the thing beneath sent back an echo to live my life while keeping the original for its collection. I have no way to know for certain. The echoes don't know they're echoes. They have all the memories, all the personality, all the continuity of identity of the originals. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that something is making copies of humans, but that the copies are so perfect that even they can't tell the difference. Isle Royale is remote. It's isolated. It's one of the least visited national parks. And it's home to something beneath the ice that's learning about humanity one person at a time, through a process of abduction and replication that's so subtle most victims never realize they've been replaced. I'm probably still me, probably the original, but I can't be certain. And that uncertainty is something I'll carry for the rest of my life, however long that life turns out to be. Story 7. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 46 years old, and I've been a cultural resources manager at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado for 14 years. Mesa Verde is famous for its cliff dwellings, ancestral Puebloan structures built into the canyon walls between 600 and 1300 CE. It's my job to preserve these archaeological sites, to prevent damage from visitors and natural processes, and to help interpret the history of the people who lived here centuries ago. I thought I understood this place, understood the culture and history, and the reasons the ancestral Puebloans eventually left Mesa Verde around 1300 CE. Then last summer I found a dwelling that isn't on any map, that contains rooms that shouldn't exist based on Puebloan architecture. And I learned that some of the ancient residents never actually left. They just moved deeper into the canyons, into spaces where time works differently, and they're still there, still living their 13th century lives in structures that exist partially in our world and partially in somewhere else. It happened in July during a routine inspection of backcountry sites. Most tourists visit the famous dwellings, Cliff Palace, Balcony House, Spruce Tree House, but Mesa Verde contains hundreds of smaller sites scattered throughout the canyons, many accessible only by difficult hiking. I was checking on a site called Far View Dwelling, documenting any new damage or needed conservation work. I'd visited Farview dozens of times over the years, knew every room and kiva, every wall and doorway. But on this visit, I noticed something new. A doorway in the back of one of the storage rooms, a small opening maybe 3 feet high, that I was certain hadn't been there before. The stonework around it matched the surrounding walls perfectly, showed the same weathering and aging, but I had detailed photographs of this room from every angle, and this doorway wasn't in any of them. Oh, I should have documented it and left. Should have brought a team back to investigate properly. But archaeologist curiosity is a powerful thing, and I had my equipment with me. Headlamp, camera, measuring tools. I crouched down and squeezed through the doorway into a passage I'd never seen before. The passage led deeper into the cliff, winding through natural rock formations and constructed walls. The masonry was exceptional, better than most Puebloan work I'd seen, with stones fitted so precisely that no mortar was visible. The passage was too long, though. I'd been moving for 5 minutes, going deeper into what should have been solid rock, far beyond where the cliff dwelling could possibly extend. The passage opened into a chamber, and what I found there made me understand that everything we thought we knew about Mesa Verde was incomplete. The chamber was a kiva, a circular ceremonial room typical of Puebloan architecture, but it was active. A fire burned in the central fire pit, smoke rising through the sipapu hole in the ceiling. The walls were covered with fresh murals, colors bright and unfaded, and sitting around the fire were 4 people in traditional ancestral Puebloan clothing, speaking a language I recognized as an archaic form of the Tewa dialect, still spoken by some modern Pueblo peoples. They looked up when I entered, their expressions showing surprise but not alarm. One of them, an older man with gray hair tied back, spoke to me in Tewa. I didn't understand everything, but I caught enough. Another one has found the passage. The timing must be approaching. I don't understand, I said in English, then tried the few phrases of Tewa I knew. I am a keeper of the old places. I mean, no disrespect. The old man switched to English, heavily accented but clear. We know what you are. You are a guardian of the emptied dwellings, the ones our people left behind when we moved here, to the deep places where time does not flow the same. Who are you? How are you living here? We are the ones who stayed when others left. The drought came, the resources failed, and most of our people moved away to join other groups, to find new homes. But some of us understood that the problem wasn't just drought. The problem was time. The world was changing too fast, moving toward things we didn't want to be part of. So we found the deep places, the rooms in the rock where time slows or stops, where we could continue living as we always had. I looked around the kiva more carefully. Everything looked authentic. The pottery, the textiles, the tools, but it was all in current use, not ancient artifacts. These people were living a 13th century lifestyle in what appeared to be a 13th century dwelling, but they were doing it now, in the present. How is this possible? I asked. The canyons have always had thin places, one of the women explained, places where the boundary between what is and what was becomes permeable. The ancient ones knew how to find these places, how to build dwellings that existed in both times. Most of those dwellings are ruins now, but a few remain active, maintained by those of us who chose to stay. How many of you are there? In this dwelling, 17. In other deep dwellings throughout Mesa Verde, maybe 200 total. We live as our ancestors lived, maintaining the old ways, existing in a time that is both then and now. The old man stood, gesturing for me to follow. He led me through passages that connected multiple chambers, living spaces, storage rooms, additional kivas, and in each room I saw people living their lives, grinding corn, weaving baskets, crafting pottery, teaching children, all of them in traditional clothing, all of them speaking Tewa, all of them existing in a perfectly preserved bubble of 13th century Puebloan life. The outside world thinks we left, the old man continued. That Mesa Verde was abandoned around 1300, but we didn't leave. We retreated into the deep places where the ancestors built doorways between times. We've been here for 700 years, living the same span of years over and over, maintaining our culture exactly as it was. But you age, I said, looking at the old man's weathered face, at the children playing in one of the rooms. You have children, you grow older. How does that work if time is stopped? Time isn't stopped. It's slowed and looped. We age, but slowly. 1 year here might be 10 years in your time. And when we die, our children continue, and their children maintaining the knowledge and ways. We're not frozen. We're preserved, like corn in a sealed jar, continuing but not spoiling. I spent hours in that deep dwelling, documenting what I could, speaking with the residents, trying to understand how they maintained this existence. They were welcoming but cautious, explaining that very few outsiders found the passages, that the doorways only appeared to certain people at certain times. Why can I see this? I asked. Why did the doorway appear to me? Because you are a keeper of the old places, a young woman explained. You protect the empty dwellings. You honor the ancestors. You understand that some things should be preserved exactly as they were. The doorways recognize this intention. They open to those who would not destroy what they find. They showed me other passages, other connections to different deep dwellings throughout Mesa Verde, an entire network of occupied cliff dwellings existing in slowed time, invisible to normal visitors, maintained by descendants of the people who'd chosen preservation over adaptation. Don't you want to rejoin the modern world? I asked. Don't your young people want to leave, to experience life beyond these canyons? Some do, the old man admitted, and we allow it. The doorways can be opened from both sides. Those who wish to leave can step through into your time, can join the modern Pueblo communities, can live in the world you know, but most choose to stay. Most prefer the old ways, the certainty of tradition, the peace of a life that doesn't change. He led me back to the entrance, back to the small doorway that had appeared in Farview dwelling. You can visit again if you wish. The doorway will open for you, but you cannot tell others, not in any official capacity. The deep dwellings must remain hidden, must remain protected. If the outside world knew we were here, they would come. They would study us, document us, try to bring us back into normal time. We would become exhibits in our own homes. I understand, I said. But this changes everything we think we know about Mesa Verde history, the abandonment, the migration. It's all wrong. No, it's accurate. Most people did leave. Most did migrate to other areas, joined other Pueblo groups, continued their lives in new places. Only a few hundred of us chose the deep dwellings, chose preservation over change. We're not the rule. We're the exception. And that's why we must remain hidden. I squeezed back through the doorway into a far-view dwelling. When I looked back, the opening was gone. Just solid stone wall, exactly as it had been in all my previous visits, exactly as it appeared in all my photographs. I've been back to that room 17 times since then. Sometimes the doorway is there, sometimes it isn't. When it is there, I visit the deep dwelling, bring news from the outside world to those who wish to hear it, document changes in their community, maintain my role as a bridge between their time and mine. And I've found other doorways throughout Mesa Verde, not many, maybe 6 or 7 total, each leading to a different deep dwelling where ancestral Puebloan descendants continue living in preserved time. I keep a private map of these locations marked with symbols that mean nothing to anyone else but guide me back to the places where past and present overlap. I haven't told anyone officially. My reports describe standard conservation work, routine inspections, normal archaeological findings. But in my personal journals, I document everything. The deep dwellings, their inhabitants, the network of passages that connect them. And I've started noticing similar patterns at other Southwest parks. Chaco Canyon, Bandelier, Canyon de Chile, places where indigenous peoples built impressive structures and then supposedly abandoned them. What if they didn't abandon them? What if some portion of those populations did exactly what the Mesa Verde deep dwellers did? Retreat into thin places where time worked differently, where they could preserve their ways of life intact while the outside world changed around them? I can't prove it, but I suspect that throughout the Southwest, in parks and monuments and forgotten canyons, there are communities of people still living in deep dwellings, still maintaining traditions that are centuries old, still existing in bubbles of preserved time while the modern world flows past them. Mesa Verde's official history says the ancestral Puebloans left around 1300 CE due to drought, resource depletion, and social pressures. But the real history is more complex. Some left, yes, but some stayed, in ways we're not equipped to understand, in places that exist at the intersection of archaeology and impossibility. And I'm one of the few people who knows they're there, who visits them, who serves as a bridge between their preserved time and our rushing present. It's not work I can ever acknowledge officially, not responsibility I can put on any job description, but it's the most important work I do. Maintaining the connection, preserving the secret, protecting the deep dwellings and the people who chose to live in them. Because some histories don't end. Some cultures don't abandon their homes. They just find ways to continue that we've stopped looking for, stopped believing in, stopped considering possible. The ancestral Puebloans are still at Mesa Verde, some of them in the deep places, living their lives exactly as their ancestors did, in structures that exist in 2 times at once, waiting patiently for the rare visitors who can find the doorways that connect. the past to the present. Story 8. My name is Marcus Washington. I'm 34 years old, and I'm an interpretive ranger at Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. My job is to educate visitors about the 225-million-year-old fossilized trees, the Triassic period paleontology, and the geological processes that created this landscape. I love the work, sharing science with people, explaining deep time, helping them understand that these rainbow-colored logs were once living trees in a tropical forest that existed before dinosaurs. But 3 months ago, I found a petrified tree that isn't 225 million years old, that's still somehow alive despite being solid stone. And that remembers everything that's happened in this landscape since the Triassic, including things that shouldn't have happened, things that contradict our understanding of Earth's history, and things that suggest time itself might not be as linear as we believe. It happened in October during an off-trail survey. We do these periodically, checking areas that visitors don't access, looking for new fossil sites or evidence of illegal collection. I was about 2 miles from the nearest trail in a section of Badlands that's particularly colorful, but rarely visited due to difficult terrain. I found the tree in a small wash, partially exposed by recent erosion. It was spectacular, maybe 40 feet long, 3 feet in diameter, with a crystalline mineralization in shades of red, orange, and purple. But what made it unusual was that it was warm. Not sun warm, it was 95 degrees in the shade, so everything was warm. But this tree was internally warm, like it had its own heat source. When I put my hand on the surface, I could feel a pulse, a rhythmic warmth that came and went like a heartbeat. Petrified wood shouldn't be warm. It's stone, mineralized plant tissue, completely inert. But this tree was warm and pulsing, and when I looked closely at its surface, I could see movement, colors shifting very slightly, patterns flowing through the crystalline structure like fluids moving through living tissue. I took temperature readings. The tree's surface was 98.6 degrees, human body temperature, despite being solid stone in 95-degree air. The temperature pulsed, rising and falling by a few degrees in a regular rhythm. And there was a sound, barely audible, like something breathing or like water moving through pipes. I reported it to my supervisor, described the anomalies, suggested we needed a geologist or paleontologist to examine it. She sent me back with equipment, thermal imaging camera, seismograph, chemical analysis tools. We documented everything over the course of a week, and every measurement confirmed the impossible. This petrified tree was somehow alive, or something alive was inhabiting the fossilized form. On the 8th day of observation, something changed. I was taking temperature readings when the tree's surface rippled like water disturbed by a dropped stone. The crystalline structure became briefly translucent, and I could see inside, not just mineral deposits, but structures that looked like organs, like vessels, like anatomy that was neither plant nor animal, but something else entirely. And then I heard a voice, not audible sound, but communication directly into my mind. Finally, someone who observes long enough. Finally, someone who stays. I jumped back, dropping my equipment. Who are you? What are you? I am what remains when life becomes stone. I am memory, crystallized. I am the forest, remembering itself. You're the tree? You're alive? I was a tree. I was part of a forest that grew here 225 million years ago when this land was tropical and wet. I died and was buried, and My tissues were replaced by minerals. But consciousness doesn't fossilize in the same way. It becomes part of the crystal structure, part of the patterns in the stone. I'm not alive in the way you understand life, but I'm aware. I remember. Remember what? Everything. Every moment since I grew, since I died, since I became stone. I remember the tropical forest, the rivers, the creatures that walked beneath my branches. I remember the climate changing, the land drying, the forest disappearing. I remember being buried, being compressed, being transformed from wood to stone, and I remember everything after. 245 million years of lying here, watching the world change around me. I sat down heavily, my mind struggling to process what I was experiencing. You've been conscious for 225 million years? In the same place? Not just me, all of us. Every petrified tree in this park, every fossil, every stone that once lived, we all remember. We're all still here, watching, recording, maintaining memory of everything that happened. The forest never died. It just transformed into a different kind of existence. Why can I hear you now? Why hasn't anyone else reported this? Most people don't stay long enough, don't observe carefully enough. They see fossils as dead things, as artifacts of the past. They don't expect us to be present, so they don't perceive our presence. But you stayed. You observed. You treated me as something worth sustained attention, and that attention created the resonance necessary for communication. Over the following weeks, I spent hours with the conscious tree, learning what it remembered, trying to understand what its 225 million year awareness meant. And what it told me challenged everything I thought I understood about time and history and the nature of consciousness. The tree remembered things that shouldn't have happened. It remembered ice ages that geologists don't know about, volcanic eruptions that aren't in the geological record, extinction events that happened but left no evidence. It remembered seeing humans in the Triassic period, which is impossible. Humans didn't exist for another 220 million years, but the tree insisted it had seen them, had watched them walk through the ancient forest wearing clothes and carrying tools that made no sense in that era. Time isn't linear here, the tree explained. Or rather, time is linear, but it loops back on itself occasionally, creating moments where different eras overlap. Your humans weren't from the Triassic. They were from your era, but they somehow appeared here in my time for brief moments, and I've seen it happen repeatedly over the millions of years. Time leaks, past and present and future occasionally merge. That's not how time works. That's not how you think time works, but I've been observing for 225 million years. I've seen enough temporal anomalies to know that your understanding is incomplete. The tree offered to show me its memories, to let me experience what it had witnessed. I agreed, not fully understanding what I was accepting. The tree's surface rippled again, became translucent, and I felt my consciousness pulled into the crystalline structure, into the network of memories stored in mineral patterns. And I saw it all. The Triassic forest, lush and green and alien. Creatures that matched our fossil records and creatures that didn't, that shouldn't have existed. But the tree had seen them anyway. Ice ages that came and went, leaving no trace but still happening. Volcanic eruptions that reshaped the landscape in ways that contradicted our geological maps. And I saw humans, multiple times across the millennia, Groups of people would appear in the forest, looking confused and lost. They'd stay for hours or days, then vanish again, returning to whatever time they'd come from. The tree had watched humans arrive out of sequence, had seen our species existing in eras before we should have evolved. When the tree released me, I was shaking, nauseated from experiencing millions of years of memory in the span of minutes. Why? I asked. Why show me this? Because you need to understand that the past isn't fixed. History isn't a straight line from then to now. It's a tangle, a web, with connections and loops that your species hasn't discovered yet. And because you work here, you interpret the past for visitors. You should know that the past you're describing isn't complete, isn't entirely accurate. But I can't tell people about time loops in humans in the Triassic and memories stored in fossils. They'd think I was insane. Then don't tell them everything, but stop telling them the past is simple and dead. Tell them it's complex and alive. Tell them that fossils are more than just stone. Plant seeds of understanding that might grow into bigger truths. I've continued working at Petrified Forest, still give tours, still explain paleontology and geology, still help visitors understand deep time. But my perspective has changed. I no longer describe fossils as dead remains. I call them preserved memories, witnesses to ancient times. I encourage people to spend more time observing individual specimens, to treat them as something worthy of sustained attention rather than quick photographs. And occasionally, visitors report strange experiences, feeling warmth from the petrified wood, hearing sounds that aren't quite there, seeing colors shift and flow in the crystalline structures. They usually dismiss these experiences as tricks of the light or heat exhaustion, but I know what they're actually experiencing. Brief moments of resonance with the conscious fossils, brief communications from memories that have been accumulating for 225 million years. I've found other conscious trees throughout the park. Not all of them. Most petrified wood is truly inert, truly dead, but some percentage, maybe 1 in 100, maintained enough structural complexity during fossilization to preserve awareness, to continue existing in some form beyond death. They're all watching, all remembering, all witnessing the flow of time in ways we can't perceive normally. And they all report the same thing: time leaks. The past isn't sealed off from the present. Occasionally, the boundaries blur, and things from different eras interact in ways that shouldn't be possible. I don't know what this means for our understanding of physics, of history, of consciousness. But I know that when you work in deep time, when you spend your days among objects that are hundreds of millions of years old, you start to understand that the past isn't a foreign country we can never visit. It's a place that occasionally overlaps with now, that maintains awareness through preserved structures, that watches the present with the patient attention of beings who've been observing for longer than our species has existed. The Petrified Forest isn't a graveyard of dead trees. It's a library of living memories, a network of conscious witnesses that have been recording Earth's history for longer than any human record. And if we learn to communicate with them properly, if we develop the technology or sensitivity to interface with their crystalline consciousness, we could access a historical record that goes back to the Triassic period, that includes events we've never known about, that documents the true complexity of how time works. But for now, I'm just an interpretive ranger who talks to fossils and occasionally hears them talk back. Who knows that the rainbow-colored logs scattered across the Arizona desert are more than beautiful stones? They're witnesses, memories, living archives that remember everything, including things that haven't happened yet and things that happened in sequences our timeline doesn't account for. The past is alive at Petrified Forest. You just have to know how to listen. Story 9. My name is Diana Foster. I'm 50 years old, and I've been a wilderness ranger at Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska for 18 years. Gates of the Arctic is the most remote national park in the United States. 8.5 million acres, with no roads, no trails, no facilities, no designated campsites. It's truly wild, truly pristine, a place where you can travel for weeks without seeing another human being or any sign of human presence. I've loved the absolute isolation, the sense that nature here operates without any human influence. But last summer, I discovered that we're not alone in Gates of the Arctic, that some of the wildlife we've been documenting isn't wildlife at all, and that there are intelligent beings living in the Brooks Range who've been here far longer than humans, and who've been watching us with increasing concern about our impact on their territory. It happened in August during a solo patrol of the Arrogitch Peaks area. I was about 70 miles from the nearest village, in country so remote that I was probably the first human to stand in some of the places I was walking. The landscape was spectacular. Jagged granite peaks, glacial valleys, caribou herds moving across tundra, grizzlies feeding on berries. Pure wilderness, exactly as it had been for millennia. I was photographing a group of Dall sheep on a rocky slope when I noticed something odd. One of the sheep was watching me with more interest than normal. Dall sheep are skittish, will usually retreat when they see humans. But this one stood still, maintaining eye contact, its body language suggesting curiosity rather than fear. I raised my camera to photograph it more closely. Through the telephoto lens, I could see details that weren't visible to the naked eye. The sheep's eyes were wrong. Not anatomically wrong, but expressively wrong, showing intelligence that went beyond animal awareness. And its posture was slightly off, like someone wearing a sheep costume who hadn't quite mastered quadrupedal movement. The sheep turned and bounded away, joining the rest of the herd. But it moved differently than the others, more mechanically, less gracefully, like it was still learning how sheep were supposed to move. I lowered my camera, wondering if I'd imagined the anomalies, if isolation and altitude were affecting my perception. That night, something visited my camp. I was in my tent, just drifting off to sleep when I heard movement outside. Not the cautious, careful movement of a predator investigating a campsite, but deliberate footsteps, bipedal footsteps, walking around my tent in a circle. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, shone the light outside. Nothing. Just empty tundra, no tracks in the soft ground, no sign that anything had been there. But I'd heard it. I was certain of it. The next morning, I found something that confirmed I hadn't been hallucinating. Arranged in a neat line outside my tent were 7 stones, each about fist-sized, placed with obvious intention. And on each stone was a symbol carved or painted, geometric patterns that looked almost like writing, almost like mathematics, communicating something I couldn't decipher. I photographed the stones, documented their positions, tried to understand what they meant. The symbols weren't from any human culture I recognized. They weren't Inupiaq or Athabascan. the indigenous peoples of this region. They were something else, something that suggested non-human intelligence. Over the next week, I kept finding the stones. Every morning, 7 more would be arranged near my camp, each set with different symbols, always placed while I slept, despite my attempts to stay awake and catch whatever was leaving them. And I kept seeing the wrong animals. Sheep that moved mechanically, caribou with 2 intelligent eyes, a grizzly that walked upright when it thought I wasn't watching. On the 8th day, I encountered one of them directly. I was crossing a valley when a figure emerged from behind a rock outcrop. It looked like a human at first glance, roughly human-sized and shaped, wearing what appeared to be traditional Arctic clothing. But as it got closer, I could see the details were wrong. The proportions were slightly off. The movement was too smooth, and the face, when I could see it clearly, wasn't quite human. It had human features, but arranged according to different rules of symmetry, like an artist had painted a portrait from memory rather than observation. It stopped about 20 feet away from me, and we stood there looking at each other for a long moment. Then it spoke, and the voice came not from its mouth, but from somewhere around it, like the air itself was speaking. "You have been observing us. We wanted to make contact." "What are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "We are the original inhabitants of this land. We were here before your species crossed the ice bridge, before humans knew this continent existed. We watched your ancestors arrive, watched them spread across the land, watched them learn to survive in this harsh environment. And we've been watching you ever since. You're not human. No, but we can appear human when useful. Just as we can appear as any animal native to this region, we are shapeshifters, to use your terminology, though that word doesn't capture the complexity of what we are. We're beings who exist in a state of constant adaptation, changing our forms to suit our needs and environments." "How many of you are there?" "In Gates of the Arctic, perhaps 50. Across Alaska, thousands. We exist wherever wilderness remains intact, wherever there are spaces large enough for us to maintain our territories without constant human interference." "What do you want from me?" The being gestured at the vast landscape around us. "We want you to understand that this land isn't as empty as your species believes. You call it wilderness. You designate it as protected. You limit human development. This is good. But you don't realize that it's already inhabited, already claimed, already home to beings who have as much right to it as any human. We're not wildlife. We're people in our own way, and we're concerned about what's happening. What's happening. Your species is expanding even into the most remote areas. More tourists every year, more research stations, more flights overhead, more noise, more development, more impact. Gates of the Arctic is supposed to be preserved wilderness, but preservation only works if there's enough space for all inhabitants, human and otherwise. We're running out of room." The being's form rippled slightly, like heat distortion in air, and for a moment I saw what it actually looked like beneath the human disguise. Something tall and angular, with too many joints in its limbs, with a head that was smooth and elongated. Then the human form stabilized again. "We're making contact with you because you're a ranger. You protect this land. We want you to understand that protecting it means protecting us as well, means maintaining spaces where we can exist without having to constantly hide, without having to waste energy maintaining disguises. What do you want me to do? Recognize us. Acknowledge that wilderness isn't just empty space for humans to visit, it's inhabited space that belongs to others. When your agency makes decisions about gates of the Arctic, about how much human presence to allow, about what activities to permit, remember that those decisions affect beings you don't normally see. We're asking for consideration for the recognition that we exist and have legitimate claims to this territory. The being turned to leave, then paused. The stones we've been leaving, they're a gift and a message. They're maps showing our territories throughout gates of the Arctic, areas where we need minimal human disturbance. We're trusting you with this information. Use it wisely. It walked away, its form blurring and shifting until it resembled a caribou, then blended into the landscape and disappeared. I collected all the stones I'd been documenting, studied their symbols, and gradually understood what they were showing. The patterns were territorial markers, defining areas throughout gates of the Arctic where the shapeshifters maintained their primary habitats. And when I overlaid these patterns on maps of popular hiking routes and research zones, I saw potential conflicts, places where human activity was expanding into shapeshifter territory, creating the pressure they'd warned about. I've been incorporating this information into my work carefully. When I recommend areas for seasonal closures to protect wildlife, I include the shapeshifter territories. When I evaluate permit applications for research or guide operations, I steer them away from sensitive zones. I can't explain to my supervisors or colleagues why certain areas need additional protection. I can't tell them about intelligent shapeshifters who've been here for millennia. But I can use my position to create buffer zones, to maintain spaces where the original inhabitants can exist without constant human pressure. And I've encountered them many times since that first contact. Sometimes they appear as animals, always slightly off, always too intelligent. And sometimes they appear in humanoid forms to communicate directly. They've shared more information about their culture, their history, their relationship with the land. They're not spirits or ghosts or supernatural entities. They're physical beings with biology and ecology and social structures, just radically different from anything human science has categorized. They've been here longer than we have. They have as much right to gates of the Arctic as any human, possibly more, and they're asking us to recognize that wilderness isn't empty space. It's home to beings we don't normally see, beings who need space and privacy and recognition. I'm writing this as a record and as a message to future rangers who might work in gates of the Arctic. If you find stone arrangements with geometric symbols, if you see animals that move wrong or look too intelligent, if you encounter humanoid figures in areas where no human should be, don't dismiss it as imagination or altitude effects. You're encountering the original inhabitants. They're real, they're aware, and they're trying to communicate. Respect their territories. Maintain the wildness they need to survive. And remember that protecting wilderness means protecting all its inhabitants, including the ones we've only recently begun to understand exist. Gates of the Arctic isn't empty. It never was. We've just been looking at it through a framework that only acknowledges forms of life we expect to find. But if we expand our awareness, if we look more carefully, we'll see that wilderness is far more populated and far more complex than our taxonomies admit. The shapeshifters are there. They're watching. They're hoping we'll be wise enough to share the land rather than claiming it entirely for ourselves. And I'm doing what I can, in my small way, to ensure their territories remain protected, their needs remain met, and their presence remains acknowledged, even if it can never be officially documented. Story 10. My name is Christopher Yang. I'm 42 years old and I've been a ranger at Badlands National Park in South Dakota for 16 years. Badlands is known for its layered rock formations, its stark beauty, its paleontological significance. We find fossils regularly from ancient mammals that lived here 35 million years ago. It's a landscape that speaks of deep time, of geological processes operating over millions of years, of life forms that no longer exist. I've loved working here, interpreting the past for visitors, helping them understand the vast stretches of time represented in these eroded buttes and pinnacles. But 4 months ago, I found a fossil bed that contained species that never existed on Earth, and bones that show evidence of technologies that shouldn't have developed until humans came along. And I've realized that the paleontological record in Badlands isn't just documenting Earth's past. It's documenting other pasts, other timelines, other versions of evolutionary history that somehow got preserved here alongside our own. It started in December during an off-season fossil survey. Most tourists avoid Badlands in winter. It's cold, windy, often snow-covered. But winter is actually ideal for fossil hunting because erosion from freeze-thaw cycles exposes new material that's been hidden for millions of years. I was checking an area of the White River Badlands Formation, looking for the usual suspects, Oligocene mammals like Mesohippus, early horses, or Archaeotherium, pig-like creatures. Instead, I found something impossible. It was a skull, partially exposed by recent erosion, approximately the right size to be an Oligocene mammal. But when I carefully excavated around it, I discovered features that didn't match any known species. The cranial structure suggested high intelligence, a brain case far too large for any Oligocene mammal. The eye sockets were positioned for stereoscopic vision like a primate. But this was 35 million years old, far too early for primate evolution in North America, and the jaw structure showed evidence of something that looked disturbingly like tool marks, wear patterns suggesting the creature had used its teeth to hold objects while manipulating them with forelimbs. I documented everything, photographed from every angle, then carefully extracted the skull. Back at the lab, our paleontologist examined it with increasing confusion. "This doesn't match anything in our databases," she said. "The morphology is all wrong. It's like someone took features from primates, carnivores, and early ungulates and combined them in a way that shouldn't be evolutionarily possible." We ran dating tests. The surrounding sediment was definitely Oligocene, 32 million years old. The fossilization patterns matched other fossils from the same formation. This skull had been buried and preserved 32 million years ago, just like all the legitimate Oligocene fossils we regularly found. But it represented an animal that shouldn't have existed in that era, that showed cognitive developments that wouldn't appear in Earth's evolutionary record for another 30 million years. "Maybe it's a hoax," my colleague suggested. "Someone could have planted it, carved it from existing fossils to create a fake." But the fossilization was genuine. The mineralization patterns couldn't be faked. This skull had been in the ground for 32 million years, had undergone the same geological processes as everything else in the formation. It was real. I went back to the site, with a full excavation team. Over the next week, we uncovered an entire assemblage of impossible fossils. More skulls showing high intelligence, limb bones with unusual joint structures suggesting manual dexterity, and most disturbingly, bones that showed evidence of deliberate modification, cuts that looked like tool marks, holes that suggested piercing or drilling, surfaces that had been smoothed or polished. These animals, whoever or whatever they'd been, had developed tool use and possibly even early technology. In the Oligocene epoch, 32 million years ago, when Earth's most advanced mammals were cat-sized and had brain capacities comparable to modern raccoons. This is going to rewrite everything we know about evolutionary development, the paleontologist said. We'll need to publish, bring in experts, reevaluate our entire understanding of when intelligence developed. But as we excavated further, we found something even more impossible. In the same strata, mixed with the intelligent Oligocene fossils, we found modern animals. Bones from species that shouldn't exist for another 32 million years. A horse skull that matched modern equus, not the tiny Oligocene Mesohippus. Canid remains that looked like contemporary wolves. And most shockingly, a partial skeleton that looked disturbingly human. Bipedal, roughly 5 feet tall, with bone structure that matched Homo sapiens. All of it fossilized together, all of it showing the same age, all of it preserved in sediment that was definitely, unquestionably, 32 million years old. This doesn't make sense, I said, staring at the excavation site. These animals are from completely different time periods. They couldn't have lived together, couldn't have died, and been fossilized in the same event. Unless, the paleontologist said slowly, there was some kind of temporal mixing, some event that brought together animals from different eras and preserved them simultaneously. We kept digging, expanded the excavation area, and found more impossibilities. Fossils from the Cretaceous period mixed with Oligocene fauna, bones from the Pleistocene alongside creatures that lived 250 million years ago. The fossil bed was a jumble of different eras, different evolutionary lineages, all preserved together as if time itself had broken down and multiple periods had collapsed into the same moment. And stranger still, some of the fossils showed evidence of having lived together, not just died together. Bite marks from one species on bones of a different species, both from eras that were millions of years apart, dwelling structures that looked like dens or nests, containing remains of animals from different epochs, evidence of a mixed ecosystem where creatures from throughout Earth's history had somehow coexisted. What if, I said one evening while examining the evidence, this isn't our Earth's history? The paleontologist looked at me. What do you mean? What if Badlands is preserving more than just our timeline? What if this location is somehow thin, somehow permeable to other versions of evolutionary history? What if these fossils are from alternate Earths, places where evolution took different paths, where intelligence developed in different species at different times, where creatures from various periods somehow overlapped? It sounded insane, but it explained the data better than any conventional paleontology. The Badlands fossil record wasn't just documenting one Earth's past. It was documenting multiple Earths, multiple timelines, all somehow accessible from this one location. We found more evidence supporting this theory. In one section of the excavation, we uncovered a complete skeleton of what looked like a sophisticated tool-using species. Bipedal, large-brained, with hand structure suggesting fine motor control. But it wasn't human or even primate. It was descended from carnivores, specifically from an Oligocene ancestor similar to modern dogs. In this creature's timeline, apparently, canids had developed intelligence instead of primates. In another section, we found marine fossils mixed with terrestrial ones, from an era when the Badlands was landlocked. These came from a timeline where continental drift had taken a different path, where South Dakota was coastal, where evolution had produced different ecosystems and different dominant life forms. The more we dug, the more timelines we found. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all preserved in these layered Badlands formations, all accessible through some property of this location that made it a crossroads of evolutionary histories. "We can't publish this," the paleontologist said finally. "If we try to explain what we're actually finding, we'll be dismissed as crackpots. Our careers will be over." So what do? We publish the least controversial specimens, the ones that are unusual but not impossible, and we quietly archive the rest, document them for future researchers who might have better frameworks for understanding what we've discovered. That's what we did. We published a paper about unusual Oligocene